If the Atlanta Braves do decide to stay under the luxury tax in 2025, could it be to spend big money next offseason? And now Cody Bellinger is off the board going to the Yankees. What is left for the Atlanta Braves in the outfield? I'll answer those questions and many more on today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I'm your host, Jake Mastriani, and you can follow me on social media at shortstopball and at LockedOn_Braves. If you're new and watching this on YouTube, please stop what you're doing, hit that subscribe button as it helps out a ton when you do that. Also, if you hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment down below, it doesn't take but a minute, and it helps me out a lot whenever you do that. And if you're listening on the audio version, you can help out by leaving me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And thank you so much for your support here at Locked On Braves. The views have been amazing lately, even though there's been no news. And we've had some great conversations. Yesterday's podcast in particular, I wasn't sure how that was going to go. It was just something on my heart that I wanted to talk about. And I think it touched a nerve with a lot of Braves fans. And again, I'm still undecided on necessarily where I land on that. But I think it was a discussion worth having. You haven't given that a listen, go back and do so. But again, thank you so much for all the support that you give me here at Locked On Braves. It does truly mean a lot to me. Got a lot of great and positive comments on yesterday's podcast, and I truly appreciate that. And thanks as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Now we're going to do a midweek mailbag podcast. Don't typically do that, but I'm hoping to be off this weekend starting on Friday. So trying to go ahead and get this taken care of. And I'm also right now planning to record a podcast with Grant McCauley on Thursday night that I'll then post after we get done recording. So this might be the last live episode for a little bit, and I want to make sure we get in a mailbag episode this week. Wasn't sure how many questions you would have. I kind of sent it out last minute, and we got almost 20 questions to answer. So you always do a great job sending in questions. It's going to, as usual, be a wide range of topics. So if you don't like the topic in the title, keep listening, because we're probably going to cover what you do want to talk about. The college football playoff is here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. The college football playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round games December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. As I said, I wasn't sure how many questions I was going to get. We have 18 that I'm going to go through and try to cover all these in as much detail as I can. I did not have a lot of prep on this because, again, I kind of gave these last minute, and you all sent in a ton of questions, but we're going to go through them like we normally do. And I'm looking at the post on X where I sent out a question sent out a post asking for questions, and I'm going to start with those, and maybe we'll have some time for those who are here live, as we do already have a lot joining me here live. Appreciate that as well. Free Golfer says, how much better is Freddie than Olsen? Is Dansby than Arcia? Have the Braves lost that much by letting free agents go? So this is kind of a question off the podcast we had yesterday, which, again, if you didn't listen to that, please go back and do so. Again, I've got a lot of positive feedback from it. I wasn't sure when I hit end on that recording. I said that might be one of my best podcasts. It might be one of my worst. I really don't know. But this kind of stems from that conversation. How much better is Freddie than Olsen? Freddie Freeman's a Hall of Famer, I think. I think he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He just won the World Series MVP. I love Matt Olsen. I really do. I think it's hard to compare these two guys. Freddie is obviously better in my mind, but they do things differently. I mean, you get Matt Olsen because you want 40 home run power. You get Freddie Freeman because you want a guy that can hit 300 and hit 25 home runs and steal 10 bases for you and is going to get on base a lot. So they're different players with different skill sets, and both can be really good. I prefer Freddie Freeman. I would rather have Freddie Freeman. That's not a slight towards Matt Olsen, and I don't think the difference is that big, because you asked how much better is Freddie than Olsen. I do think Freddie is better, and you were alluding to that by asking how much better. Again, goes back to our conversation yesterday. Skill set wise, Freddie is a more complete player than Matt Olsen, but it's bigger than that, because Freddie was the leader in this clubhouse, and losing that. And look, Matt Olsen's a fine gentleman from all I know and all I hear, but Freddie was the guy. And I think that's kind of where I came out of our conversation yesterday is, yeah, you're letting some of these guys go in free agency. Some of them, in the case of Dansby and Max, it's because they're getting paid big money, but you're also letting some leadership go. And what effect does that ultimately have in the clubhouse and on the team? So yes, Freddie is better. I don't think it's, so much marginally better production wise. You're getting from Matt Olson what you hope to get from him, which is a lot of power. But I do think what you're losing maybe in the clubhouse applies to that as well. How much better is Dansby than Arcia? Again, I'd rather have Dansby than Arcia, and I think that's what you're saying. How much better? I mean, Dansby was a 4.5 WAR player last year, I believe, and Arcia was a 1 WAR player. Now, a lot of that comes from Dansby's defense, but I'm going to say similar thing that I said about Freeman and Olson. While maybe the on-field production isn't as dramatic, Dansby did, he had a 99 WRC plus last year. You'll certainly take that over what Arcia gave you. Had a 106 WRC plus. So he's been at least a league average offensively, has Dansby, and he's also been a Gold Glover. So he has been significantly better than Arcia, but as well with the Freddie Freeman situation, it's also Dansby was one of your leaders. And Arcia, from all we hear in the clubhouse, is that he is a great clubhouse guy, keeps things loose, likes to joke, maybe too much sometimes, and has gotten him in trouble. But, both of those guys are better. But again, it's the impact that they had in the clubhouse and on the other teams. So hope that kind of answers your question. I think they've lost on-field production in those two downgrades, going from Freddie to Olson. And from Dansby to Arcia, sure, they've lost some skill on field as well, but it's also just what they meant to this team overall. So sorry, that was one question and I spent 7 minutes on it. Didn't mean to do that. Let's get to the next one. AA WX, thoughts on a Cease trade. Are you for it? And what would the package look like? I was all for it last offseason, and I still would be this year, but I got to imagine that the Padres are going to want AJ Smith-Shawver and maybe a Nacho Alvarez. Like, they're going to want 2 top prospects. The Padres still want to compete, so they want some guys who are, close to major league ready. And I don't know if that's worth it for 1 year of Dylan Cease. Just, the risks that you inherently have with pitchers. You get Cease, he gets hurt, and you get nothing from him. So there's obviously always that risk when you're trading for a guy who only has 1 year of control. So I'd love to have Cease, and I like the idea of that. I would imagine the package is probably going to be too high than what most people would be willing to pay for Dylan Cease. Dustin Mounts, with the signings of the 2 minor league shortstops signed, the Rule 5 draft pick, what do these mean about Nacho? Move position, trade coming, no effect on him or any other options? The guys they brought in, I don't see it having much of effect on Nacho. But I also don't know what the future is with Nacho. If they don't believe he's good enough to play shortstop defensively, and if they don't believe he has the power to play third, what are you going to do with Nacho? I've said I hope they come to spring training and, Nacho and Arcia and whoever else they bring in, you just give them an open competition for shortstop. But I don't think the guys they brought in necessarily push Nacho out. I just think it's more depth at the spot. Dustin Mounts, from Chipper's interview on Foul Territory, stated that A was doing the best he can under the restrictions he has. Do you think being next to the third tier in the results of last year, ownership said spend less? Or what were your takeaway from that comment? I don't think the results from last year had much to do with it, but I did find those comments very interesting because all we hear from Alex Anthopoulos, which, by the way, things we've heard from Alex Anthopoulos this offseason that turned out to not be true, starting to wonder if you can trust anything that he says in an interview. But all you hear from Alex Anthopoulos is, I've never been given a set amount. I've never been told I can spend this much. He said that's not what he's told, that whenever he's asked for something, they've approved it. So everything we hear from Alex says that there's not really any restrictions, which we know that's not true because we know they spent every penny that they could to stay under the third luxury tax last year. So we know that there is some level of restriction. So it's interesting to hear Chipper say in his interview that he's doing the best he can under the restrictions given to him. So is Chipper lying? Is Alex lying? Somebody's not telling the truth because Alex has said, that he's never been given those restrictions. But here Chipper, who, has posted this week that he's in contact with Alex. He sees the guys that Alex is looking at, knows what he's doing. And he's telling us that there are restrictions. So again, GM speak, you always take it with a huge grain of salt. But you hear Chipper come out and say something like that, and makes you kind of wonder, what restrictions is he under? Because Chipper's saying that there are restrictions, and Alex is saying that he's not really given those constraints at all to spend if he wants to and needs to. So that was interesting to me to hear Chipper. He said it multiple times. Alex is doing the best with the restrictions that he has in place. So what are those restrictions? We'll likely never know, but it sounds like there are some restrictions there. And will those restrictions mean keeping them under the luxury tax this year? We'll discuss that and more next. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safe in your family's end zone. In sports, winning is everything. That's why you always need a good strategy to keep you moving towards the goalpost. Winning strategies for life are just as important, and that's where SelectQuote can help you protect your legacy and your family's financial future. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $7 billion in coverage since 1985. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/locked-on. Go to SelectQuote.com/locked-on to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/locked-on. Thanks as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On MLB for your second listen. And just as a reminder, we will have at least one more podcast this week. Plan to have an interview with Grant McCauley on Thursday night. I'll post that. But other than that, probably won't have another podcast this week unless the Braves actually do something big. So that's why we're doing the mailbag episode today. Let's jump back into the questions because we got many more to get to, including one from Hayden Harris, who says, luxury tax put to the side. If I made you the Braves GM and said, here's $40 million, you can either spend or acquire, but you had to use it all, how would you do it? Interesting question. Kind of had a podcast similar to this earlier in the offseason talking about what I would do. And I kind of went through that exercise staying under the luxury tax. So the first thing you have to do here is save at least $5 to $7 million for in-season moves. So you're really working with, 30, 32 million this offseason. So that's what we have to work with this offseason. I would go trade for a pitcher. I would have traded for Garrett Crochet, but let's put that aside too, because I don't think the Braves could have matched the offer that the Red Sox got. So in free agency, I'd probably go get Teoscar Hernandez. It sounds like he could be getting a deal or be asking for a deal between 22, 24 million for 3 years. I would go do that right now because he gives you the big power bat. You can play him in the outfield this year and then potentially move him to DH next year when Ozuna's gone if you don't bring Ozuna back. So I'd do that and take care of the outfield. And then I would go find a trade for a starting pitcher. I would have done the Jeffrey Springs move. I said I would have done the Crochet move. I'd do a Dylan Cease move depending on what you could get. But I would do a trade like that to try to save money to get somebody that's a little bit more controllable. Because obviously, spending the money on Teoscar, it doesn't leave a lot of room left to make many moves. I mean, you pretty much have to get a starting pitcher and a bullpen arm for less than $10 million, and that's going to be hard to do. Look, if you can't find that pitcher through trade, let's just keep it with free agents. Do you go back to Charlie Morton and say, hey, could you come back for $10 million? And then you just roll the dice with the bullpen and hope that some of these guys turn out? That's probably what I would do. In all reality, if I'm just going the free agent route, I'm probably going to Teoscar Hernandez saying, hey, you come play with us for 22, 24 million a year. And then I'm going to Charlie with whatever's left and saying, hey, can you come back and give us one more inning or one more year and give us, 150, 160 innings. And then I'm hoping the bullpen just kind of works itself out during the season and some guys step up. It's just, I don't know that the Braves are going to be able to compete in these trades. These free agent prices have now driven up the trade prices. And I don't know that the Braves could match some of these trades that we've seen so far. In the Jeffrey Springs trade, they got a comp A pick. That's a big deal. Braves don't have that to give up. They didn't have the Braden Montgomery to go get a Garrett Crochet. They didn't have the Cam Smith to go get a Kyle Tucker. they just can't match up with some of these teams in trades. Landon says, would you trade Kellick and other prospects if it meant it was for a 1 year rental of a Cease or Bichette? I mean, I have no problem with trading Jared Kellick if that's the ultimate question here. Yeah, I have no problem with that. I think it depends more on what other prospects you're giving up in that deal, but I have no problem trading the Jared Kellick experience. I'm hopeful for him. I would love to see him figure things out. But whatever adjustments they had in plan for him and in store for him coming over, it didn't work in 2024. Now you have a new hitting coach coming in, a new hitting staff. Are you going to try to reteach him something else this year? So again, I'm hopeful. It would be great for the Braves if it did work out, but I guess I'm still pretty skeptical. So I have no problem moving Jared Kellick in a trade like that to get a rental like a Cease or Bichette. I would do that in a heartbeat. Again, depending on what prospects you're attaching to him. Al Capone, if the Braves go the cheap route this offseason to stay under the luxury tax, do you think that means next year they will spend a lot of money? So this is kind of where the title comes from, but I just don't ever see the Braves spending a lot of money. Could I see the Braves spending some money next year if they were to stay under the tax? Yeah, I could. I certainly could. I think they definitely should and will. But it's still not to the degree that they're going to go out and sign whatever the top free agent is. They're just not. We've talked about it yesterday. We've talked about it a lot lately. They're not going to ever go out and sign the top free agent, because to do that, you're going to have to overpay a good amount. And Alex just has never shown a willingness to do that. So, if they do stay under the luxury tax, do I think that means that they'll spend a lot of money next offseason? Yeah, I think they will, but I think it will be for, the value deals. I just don't see them going out and signing a top free agent for 25, 30 million a year. And it's just one of those things. Until it actually happens and until they do it, I'm not going to believe it. Sean Berry, I think we need more velocity in the bullpen. Do you think it'd be worth trading a young starter with potential but an injury history like an Owen Murphy for a young flamethrower like Ben Joyce? It had to be near impossible to hit 105. I'd add a 4A starter too. So let's say an Owen Murphy and a Ian Anderson or a Bryce Elder for Ben Joyce. So essentially you're trading a young starting prospect with some upside and a depth starter for now at the big league level for a closer. I don't hate it because you are potentially going to lose Iglesias after this year. So it gives you a potential future closer. So I don't hate the idea. I don't know if the Angels would do that, but I don't mind at all trading, a valuable asset like that in an Owen Murphy or a J.R. Ritchie, somebody of that degree, which I like both of those guys. I really like J.R. Ritchie, but to get somebody who has already somewhat established himself at the big league level, I think there's still more to prove for Ben Joyce, but somebody that would be under control for a while, be cheap. The Braves need cheaper bullpen arms. They're spending so much money on their bullpen. I don't hate that idea, and I wouldn't mind seeing them do that. Dan Antlers, what about a trade with the Diamondbacks where the Braves take on Jordan Montgomery and his salary, but also get Geraldo Perdomo to take over shortstop? We send them Elder, Nacho, and Orlando Arcia, who would cover short until Lawler is ready. He's close. We've talked about a potential trade with the Diamondbacks. There's many ways I think you go make a move with the Diamondbacks. I like Perdomo. I don't know how much of an upgrade he is over Orlando Arcia to take on the contract of a Jordan Montgomery. I still think the Diamondback, I'm not against this trade. I think it makes some sense, at least from the Braves side of things. But I don't think the upgrade there for Perdomo over Arcia is enough to take on the Jordan Montgomery contract, which is $22.5 million, I believe. So it's not crazy. But if you got the Diamondbacks to eat $5 million of that, I'd be more inclined to do this deal. Scott Switzer says, if the 2025 Braves fail to advance in the playoffs, will there be a change in philosophy regarding signing premium free agents? I don't think so. I mean, it's not like this is new to the Braves with Alex Anthopoulos. This has been the Braves' way for forever. They've just never gone out and spent big money in free agency. They are terrified of those long-term deals just crippling the franchise. So no, I don't think it will change philosophy at all in terms of signing premium free agents. I still think they'll avoid those at all costs because they don't want to get caught in they don't want to get caught in an Alexander Bogaerts. They don't want to get caught in a Steven Strasburg. They don't want to get caught in a Robinson Cano. We talked about some of them yesterday. It's when you sign these big contracts, you got maybe a less than 30% chance of it actually working out, and you have about a 30% chance of it just being awful, and then the rest is kind of somewhere in the middle, being okay. So I don't think the Braves are going to change that philosophy at all, no matter what happens this year. Another one from Al Capone. Are the Braves missing a golden opportunity to take advantage of the roster they have now? It's a good question. And again, it kind of relates to what we talked about yesterday, which is probably why I'm getting some of these questions. The Braves went out and they did all these extensions to lock up this young core. And I think many of us believed that by doing that, it was going to free them up to then go out and spend big in free agency. I think that was kind of the dream that we sold ourselves on. I don't know that the front office ever said that or sold us on that, but I think that was the thought for a lot of us fans, myself included. You lock up these young kids early, and then it frees you up to then go out and make some big moves in free agency and to sign some deals, and that hasn't happened. And I think where my thinking was failed is I didn't realize at the time that all these extensions were happening that how much it was going to affect the luxury tax threshold and signing these deals that, yeah, maybe Michael Harris is only making $5 million now, but when you take in the totality of his deal, his AAV is somewhere around $16 million. I'm just taking that up top of my head. I don't know, but it's much bigger than what you're actually paying him for that year. I don't think we all considered that. And now we're seeing, I don't want to say backfire because these are still good deals with good players who are very young. But again, I think the thought process that I had, and I think a lot of you had, was that by doing that, then we would see the front office supplement that by going out and making some big free agent moves because you already have this young core built and paid for. And so now you should be able to go out and take some risk on a big free agent signing. And that just hasn't happened. And yeah, I think, if you don't win another World Series in this stretch, which I think is going to last at least another 4 years with this core, and you don't win another World Series, and you look back and say, we could have kept a Max Fried, we could have gone out and signed a Kyle Tucker, we could have, signed this big free agent that really would have helped us put us over the top, and we didn't do that. Even like it doesn't even have to be anything crazy. We could have gone and signed to Teoscar Hernandez for 3 years, $60 million or whatever, $75 million, whatever the case may be. And we didn't take that risk and do that. And now we're kicking ourselves because we were missing that piece. So yeah, there is certainly a chance for them to not take advantage of this opportunity. All right, you got several more questions here to get into and a little bit of news talking about the Bellinger trade. We'll do all that here next. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. That's FanDuel.com. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com, and I'm interested to see they have moved the Yankees ahead of the Braves now. You look at the World Series odds for 2025, and the Yankees are back to having the second best odds with the Braves with the third best odds still, and the Mets right behind them. Again, you can check all that out at FanDuel.com. Also, make sure you visit FanDuel.com/playsafe for tools and resources to help you stay in control of the way you play. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Jumping back into the questions here as we wrap things up. Got a couple more to get to. Next one is from Ransom, who says, this season is pivotal as key players on our offense are starting to hit free agency annually, beginning with Ozuna and Iglesias next offseason. Is if AA won't go all in due to financial guidelines, how will the team stay competitive over the next several years? I'm not saying this question isn't valid, but Ozuna and Iglesias aren't the core for me. The core is Riley, Olsen, Acuna, Harris, Strider, those guys. Those are the core, and those guys are still going to be here for another 2, 3, 4 years. So for me, as long as those guys are there and they're producing like they're capable of, this team's going to be competitive. Now, do you need to replace an Ozuna? Do you need to replace an Iglesias? Do you need to replace a Max Fried? Yeah. And that'll be a question, but I don't think this offseason is a pivotal year to really point to that, because Ozuna's been great. He's been their best and most consistent hitter the last 2 years, but could you bring him back for another $18 million a year? I think you probably could. Could you sign a Teoscar Hernandez and put him in that role? Could you move Acuna to that DH role and go out and get an outfielder? I think there's ways, that you can move around that. Can you find another closer for cheaper than $16 million a year that you're paying Iglesias currently? I think you can. So those two leaving in free agency, I don't think narrows the competitive window. 10-day IL says, Trevor Story has become my dream offseason target for the Braves if they can get Boston to reduce his salary. Do you think this is a semi-realistic, and what would you expect the return package to be? I've had several people ask me about Trevor Story. I just don't get the appeal. The one that somebody asked me that made some sense is if you take on Trevor Story in some of his contracts, because I'm not taking on much of any of that contract because I think it's dead money. I'm not a big believer in the Trevor Story bounce back. He hasn't been good, and he hasn't been healthy since he left Colorado. But another person I had asked me about Trevor Story is, would you take on Trevor Story and some of his contract and get Wilyer Abreu? If you do that, then you're going to have to give something significant in return for that. I'm just not a big believer in Trevor Story, so I'm not really in on that. Large Lar, I think Bregman could play shortstop. We've talked about this as well. I don't think so. And I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to go somewhere where he can play third, where he's been comfortable and is good. Could he play shortstop? Yeah. But I don't see him making that switch. I don't see that really being an option for the Braves. Maybe short term. But then even that, if you were to sign him for a shortstop, Riley's there long term. You're not going to move him off of that. So I don't think that's an option for the Braves. Caden Hurd, with Belly off the board, do we target a Jerickson Profar or just look for a trade? I'm not a fan of the Jerickson Profar move. I think he's going to get overpaid for what he did last year, and I think last year was an aberration. So I don't think Profar is the answer. Outfield options are starting to get limited with Kyle Tucker off the board. I didn't like the Cody Bellinger idea either. I'm not a big fan of Cody Bellinger's and that money. Yankees took on a lot of money. I guess we'll mention that now. The Yankees traded for Cody Bellinger, and they got $5 million in that deal. That's not enough for me. I told you if the Braves were going to trade for Bellinger, they had to eat at least 7, 8, 10 million of that deal. They gave up a Cody Petit in that, so they didn't give up a lot. Although maybe there is some upside in that arm to be a starter, but that wasn't enough for me with Belly. Outfield options aren't looking great. Like I said, it's Teoscar, it's Santander, or perhaps there's an outfield target out there that we don't know about yet. But the options are getting pretty slim for the outfield. Cab Bucks, going to steal a question from my friend here. And the question is, would you reset your luxury tax this offseason if it meant you could have Kyle Tucker next offseason? If I knew that the Braves were going to sign Kyle Tucker next offseason, if they're able to stay under the luxury tax this offseason, then I think that's worth the risk, because I think Kyle Tucker is that difference maker. And I think you can stay under the tax, still make the moves that you need to be competitive enough to win a World Series. Because again, as I've said over and over, I think this roster is good enough to win a World Series, but you have to find some depth around them to build some insurance around them. You cannot count on the Nick Allens of the world. You cannot count on the Brian De La Cruzes of the world. There has to be some quality depth there with these guys to help get them to the next level. And I think you can still do that and stay under the tax this year. But yeah, I think if you're telling me that there's 100% this team is going to sign Kyle Tucker next offseason if they stay under the tax, I think I'd be okay with that. But as I said, when the Cubs traded for Kyle Tucker, they better lock him up long term. I don't think he's getting to free agency. You give up what they gave and Cam Smith, who I think is a really good hitter, and a guy you just traded for in Paredes and an arm in Wisniewski, and you don't lock up Kyle Tucker long term, when I really don't think the Cubs are going to be legitimate World Series contenders next year, you better lock up Kyle Tucker. So I don't know that he's getting to free agency. Last question here from 10-day IL. Do you think it will be possible to pluck a young guy off another contending team with their position locked up? Looking at Pajes from the Dodgers, Snyder from Toronto, Lipscomb from Washington, and the Cards and Brewers have a ton of outfielders. It's possible if these teams are looking for pitching, because that's what the Braves have to offer. Would you do a Trey Lipscomb for an AJ Smith-Shawver? Would you do a Pajes for a J.R. Ritchie? If that's what the other team is looking for, then the Braves have something to offer. It just feels like the teams this offseason that have had something to trade, they wanted position players, and the Braves just don't have that to give up. Like I said, they don't have the Cam Smith. They don't have the Braden Montgomery to give up in these deals. They have a Drake Baldwin, but again, I don't know how he's not viewed the same by everybody. I'm not as big on Drake Baldwin as even some in the industry are. A lot of people, I think, are soured on Nacho Alvarez and him being a regular at the major league level. So the Braves just don't have a lot of position player prospect to trade from right now. One question here from the chat. Mauricio says, hey, Jake, do you know the current market value of one WAR? I've seen estimates around 8 to 10 million recently, but wanted to check out for the most updated figure. Last I looked, and it's been a little while as well, I think that's about right. But that does go up a little bit every year, but about 8 to 10 million. Brandon Edwards says, trade for Nico Hoerner. I heard when they traded Paredes that probably meant that Nico wasn't going to get moved. The Cubs might hold on to him. So I think it's less likely that they move him now. Jeff Berry A is cooking something up. I certainly hope so. Would love to see that happen. Would love to have an emergency podcast at some point here in the near future with a big signing. Scott Old signed Flaherty over Morton, but understand this being the reset year for the luxury tax. I would like Flaherty. I just think in that scenario I gave earlier, I do like Flaherty. I think he's going to be good going forward, depending on what he's going to get. I certainly like him. Somebody asked about Mason Miller, when he's going to be available. Would be a while, and who knows? Maybe the A's are trying to compete right now with some of the moves they've made this offseason. So I don't know how available he is. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Thank you so much for joining. Brave Stills, Jeffrey Humphreys, Jeff Berry, Gene Gordian here, Mass Boost, Krusty. Thank you all. Brandon Edwards, thank you for joining. Mr. CM23, really do appreciate all the support that you've been giving me here on the podcast. Again, views, comments have been outstanding lately, so let's keep it up. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Leave me a comment down below. Follow me on social media at shortstopball, at LockedOn_Braves. Make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.